A struggling single dad sang to his daughter at the park. Unaware, a woman nearby started crying. The wind was sharp that afternoon, carrying the first hints of fall, the kind of wind that rustled the dry leaves, lifting them just enough to make children chase them and adults button their coats. But Cal had no coat to button. Just a threadbare hoodie and a daughter who hadn't eaten anything but a granola bar since morning. Lila clutched his hand tightly as they crossed the cracked sidewalk into Harrison Park. She was 6, with big, curious eyes and a pink plastic clip in her hair that was starting to lose its spring. Her sneakers were slightly too small. Cal had noticed the way her toes curled, but she hadn't complained once. She rarely did. He scanned the playground. It was modest. 2 rusty swings, a tilted slide, and a sandbox that hadn't seen fresh sand in years. Still, it was a safe space for an hour or two while he figured out what to do next. Cal led her to a bench in the quieter part of the park, shaded by a towering maple tree that seemed too grand for its surroundings. He lifted her onto the bench beside him, gave her a lopsided smile, and pulled his guitar case from beneath the bench. It was old duct-taped on one side, but it was all he had left of the life he'd imagined before jobs disappeared, before his ex left, before parenthood became a solitary act of survival. He opened the case and pulled out the guitar fingers, trembling not from nerves but from hunger and too many nights sleeping in the van. Leela looked up, brightening. "Are you going to play the sleepy song, Daddy?" He nodded. "Only if you promise not to fall asleep on the bench again." She giggled, that light bubbling sound that somehow kept him going. He strummed the first chord, rough, slightly out of tune. But the song wasn't about perfection. It was about memory. Cal began to sing. "Stars don't sleep, they just shine quieter at night. Close your eyes, love, I'll guard you till morning light." It was an old lullaby, not one from any record or radio. One he had heard long ago, back when he was just a boy in a group home somewhere in Ohio. He didn't remember who taught it to him, only that it soothed the sobs of a girl in the bunk next to his when the power went out and the world outside screamed with sirens. He used to hum it for her. Now he sang it for his daughter. Across the park, a woman paused mid-step. Mira Langston was not someone who paused often. CEO of a wellness startup now valued at 8 figures, she had conference calls, time blocks, and meditation alarms stacked with robotic precision. She'd stopped at the park for a walk between meetings, headphones in hand, eyes scanning emails, but something, that froze her. That voice, that song. It hit her in the chest like a car backing into her ribs. She stumbled to a nearby bench without realizing her knees suddenly weak. The chords were simple raw, but the melody carried a gravity that felt personal. Too personal. She blinked, focusing on the man playing. He looked like every struggling father she'd seen in the city, worn clothes, tired eyes, trying to hold the world together for someone small. The little girl was resting her head on his arm, content, safe. But the song. The stars don't sleep. They only shine quieter at night. Her lips parted. That line. That exact line. It wasn't in any published lullaby. It wasn't something you'd hear on TV. It was hers. She had been 8, scared, abandoned. The group home in the suburbs had been cold and loud, and she cried every night for the first 2 months, except the nights when he sang. She never saw his face clearly. Boys and girls were kept in different dorms, but one of them used to hum through the vents. Then, one night, there were words. He had made them up for her. Or maybe for himself. She never knew. Until now. Mira pressed a hand to her lips, fighting an unfamiliar tremble in her throat. Her heart pounded so hard it made her nauseous. 27 years had passed since that group home. She'd been adopted by family in Massachusetts, changed her last name, built a whole new life from dust. But something from that forgotten world was sitting 20 feet away, alive, singing, real. She wanted to get up, to speak, to walk over and ask, "Where did you learn that song?" But something in his posture, stooped, guarded, warned her not to interrupt. So she watched, and listened, and cried silently behind her designer sunglasses, feeling more exposed than she had in decades. When the song ended, the little girl clapped and the man chuckled softly. Mira stood hesitated and turned away. She didn't want to scare him. Not yet. Not before she was sure. But she knew. She knew. The man singing to his daughter in the park had once sung to her through vents in a broken building. He had stitched words into darkness and gave her the first real comfort she ever felt as a child. And now he had no idea she was here, watching, remembering, and starting, maybe for the first time in a long while, to feel something she thought was long gone. Hope. The elevator glided silently to the top floor of the Langston Tower, a sleek steel and glass headquarters that gleamed like ambition against the Boston skyline. Mira stood at the back of the elevator car, unmoving, arms crossed tightly as if holding herself together. The doors opened with a soft chime, but she didn't step out. She stared at her reflection in the brushed metal wall. The woman looking back at her was composed, sharp navy blazer heels that clicked with precision and a face sculpted for press releases. But inside, beneath that polished armor, something had shifted. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The melody still lingered in her ears like an echo from a dream. Stars don't sleep, they just shine quieter at night. Mira hadn't thought about that song in decades. She hadn't wanted to. The group home was a place she'd buried in the deeper parts of her memory, a faded scar beneath the surface of a perfectly curated life. She'd always told herself she was lucky to get out, that love, stability, and safety were earned, not owed. And yet, that song hadn't come from nowhere. It wasn't part of a soundtrack. It was theirs, hers, and the boy she never really saw but always remembered. His voice had been the only warmth in a world of metal bed frames and institutional beige. They weren't supposed to talk through the vents between dorms, but someone had. Night after night. At first, just humming, then a name. Hey, you still crying? And then one night that voice had offered her a lullaby. No adult ever noticed. No staff ever asked. The boy was just a whisper in the dark who sang until she stopped shaking. And when he stopped, when he vanished from the other side of the wall, she'd cried herself to sleep every night for weeks. Then she hardened, promised herself never to rely on anyone again. But that promise was unraveling. Mira stepped off the elevator and into her office, ignoring the receptionist who called out a greeting. She closed the door quietly behind her. Inside, the space was sleek, warm-toned, filled with curated touches of nature plants, abstract paintings, a soft couch. It was designed to feel calm, safe, controlled. She dropped her bag on the desk and sat. Not on the leather chair behind the desk, but on the couch, the place she reserved for the vulnerable moments of other people. Now she was the one unraveling. She pulled out her phone and searched Harrison Park Musician's guitar, single dad, Boston area. Nothing helpful. She searched again local parks, community music events, afternoon performers. Still nothing. Her fingers hovered. What was she even trying to do? He didn't recognize her. He probably wouldn't. She barely remembered his face. Just the song. Just the feeling of someone out there caring enough to hum through walls. But there was something else bothering her. Something more pressing than nostalgia. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that a night's sleep could fix. It was in his shoulders, in the way he kept his body angled toward the little girl like he was expecting the world to come for her. He had the reflexes of someone who'd fought too long with nothing left to give. And the girl, Lila he'd called her, was small, sweet, and heartbreakingly content with a song and a smile. Mira tapped her phone again. This time she searched city records, community support groups, child care aid programs, music therapy centers, anything that might give her a clue. Then paused. What am I doing? She asked herself. She, Mira Langston, CEO, keynote speaker, former foster kid, turned Forbes featured entrepreneur, was obsessively hunting a man she hadn't seen since childhood. Not because she needed closure, but because Because she owed him something. No, not owed. She remembered. There had been one night, cold raining, when the thunder was so loud she'd curled under the blanket sobbing, muffling her cries into her pillow. That night the voice hadn't sung. He'd just said, "Don't worry, I'm scared too. But we'll both make it out. You'll see." And she had. She'd made it out. Maybe it was time to make sure he did too. Mira rose from the couch slowly. She walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out a file, a project she'd shelved long ago. Community Roots Initiative. It had been a dream back when her startup was still scrappy and idealistic, offered job training and childcare for struggling single parents in partnership with arts programs. But it had never launched. Investors thought it was too soft, too unscalable. She flipped through the pages. The outline was still there. So was the funding quietly tucked in her discretionary philanthropy budget. She stared at the mission statement. Help people reclaim the pieces of themselves they were told didn't matter. Her phone buzzed. A reminder, 2 p.m. wellness briefing. She dismissed it. Instead, she opened a new tab and typed "Set up meeting with Director of Local Group Homes." Her old one was still running now, under a new name. She hadn't set foot near it in 20 years. Maybe it was time. That night, Mira couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of her penthouse condo. The windows overlooked the harbor, all lights and glass and everything she'd once dreamed of. But it felt cold. She pulled her blanket tighter, closed her eyes. And without meaning to, she whispered the first line of that lullaby. "Stars don't sleep." Her voice cracked. Somewhere out there, the boy who once calmed her storms was still singing, only now to a little girl who looked at him like he held the whole sky. And maybe, just maybe, it was her turn to give a little of that sky back. The next day was colder. The kind of cold that seeped through clothes and settled into bones, the kind that made people walk faster, heads down, gloves tight. But Cal moved slower. He stood on the sidewalk outside the small shipping warehouse, shoulders hunched against the wind, one hand resting on the worn guitar case at his side. Inside the building, a manager was explaining apologetically but firmly that the temp job he'd been promised had already been filled. Budget cuts. Nothing personal. Cal didn't argue. He just nodded, thanked the man quietly, and stepped back into the cold. Lila was at the community center daycare for a few hours thanks to a kind woman at the local church who had pulled strings. Cal had spent the last 3 hours walking first to the warehouse, then to the local diner, asking about dishwashing shifts, then to the music store on Main Street, where he'd offered to tune instruments for free if it might turn into something regular. Nothing. Everyone was polite, but no one said yes. Now he stood near the corner of Harrison and 6th, the guitar case heavier in his hand than ever before. Not physically, emotionally. It used to feel like hope. Now it felt like history, his, not anyone else's. He walked back toward the park. He didn't know why. Maybe it was routine. Maybe it was because that was where Lila had smiled yesterday for the first time in days. Or maybe, though he wouldn't admit it, it was because of the woman in the tan coat with the unreadable eyes. She had watched him with a look he couldn't place. Not pity, not fear. Something else. He reached the bench under the maple tree, now losing more of its red-gold leaves. He sat, rubbing his hands together to warm them. Then he took out the guitar, tuned it slowly, and began to play, not for an audience, not even for Lila this time. Just to feel something move through his fingers that didn't feel like survival. Across the park, Mira stood at the edge of the walking path, hidden partly behind a lamppost, holding a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She watched him. He didn't see her. He was too focused, too inside the music. Mira had spent the entire night trying to convince herself that this was absurd, that she should just move on, let the past stay where it was. But she couldn't. She had even checked her schedule this morning, told her assistant to block out the afternoon with a vague personal development label. And now, here she was, standing like a ghost on the edge of someone else's life. But she'd come for a reason. When Cal finished his song, she finally stepped forward. Her heels clicked gently on the pavement, and Cal looked up startled. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Mira offered a careful smile. "I heard you yesterday," she said. Her voice was calm even. "Your song, it stayed with me." Cal squinted slightly, studying her. She looked polished, confident. Way out of his world, but there was something kind in her eyes. "Thanks," he said quietly. "My daughter likes that one. She's not here today, daycare, just for the morning." A friend pulled some strings. He hesitated, then added, "Helps me look for work." Mira nodded. "You're a musician." He laughed softly without joy. "Not anymore. Just a dad with a guitar and not enough time to tune it, right?" She smiled again, this time with a flicker of something deeper. "I used to hear that song. A long time ago. In a place I try not to think about." Cal froze. Mira watched his eyes shift just barely, but it was enough. There was something there. Recognition memory. Or maybe just the instinctive tightening of someone who's been hurt too many times. "I'm Mira," she said, offering her hand. He looked at it, then shook gently. "Cal." She sat beside him on the bench, leaving a respectful space. "I don't want to intrude. I just wondered if you wrote that song." Cal looked at the guitar, then at her. "I don't remember," he admitted. "Parts of it, maybe. I think I heard it once. A long time ago. Some words came later. It's been with me ever since." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, just full. Full of things neither of them knew how to say yet. Then Mira asked quietly, "Were you ever in the foster system?" Cal's shoulders twitched. He looked away. "Yeah, years ago. Couple homes. One of them was in Ohio." Mira felt her pulse jump. "Me too." Cal looked back at her slowly. There it was, just a flicker, but real. The same flicker he'd seen in mirrors when he hummed the song alone, the same ghost she had chased all night. "I remember," she whispered. "I was the girl who cried at night. Someone sang that song through the vents. Every night. Until one day it stopped." Cal's mouth parted slightly. He blinked as though trying to process something too old, too fragile. "I didn't know," he said, voice hoarse. "They moved me without warning. I thought you'd stop needing it." Mira looked down at her hands. "I never stopped needing it. I just learned how to be quiet." They sat in silence again this time, both aware it was no longer coincidence. It was recognition. It was two children who had once shared the same pain, now sitting on the same bench, grown weary but still carrying the same thread of music between them. After a moment, Cal asked, "Why now?" Mira looked at him. "Because I think maybe you helped me survive something I didn't know how to survive, and I'm not sure you ever got that in return." He didn't answer. Not yet. But his eyes softened. His grip on the guitar loosened. And for the first time in a long time, the space between them didn't feel so heavy. It felt like the beginning of something that had been waiting years to be found. The faded brick building on the edge of Westvale Avenue hadn't changed much. The name had, from St. Augustine Children's Home to the more hopeful Haven Bridge Community Center, but the bones were the same. The archway still creaked in the wind. The chain-link fence still leaned inward like it was trying to protect what stood behind it. And the old sycamore tree out front, scarred by decades of initials and storm damage, still stood vigil like a weary sentinel. Mira parked across the street and sat in her car staring at the front steps. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. For someone who had negotiated 7-figure deals and stood on TED stages without blinking, it was absurd how this small, quiet building made her pulse race. But this place had held her screams, her silence, her smallest self. She hadn't been back since the day she was adopted at age 8, when the Langstons had driven her away in a beige Volvo and promised her a fresh start. That start had been real in many ways. It had given her education structure, even affection, but it also came with an unspoken rule: never look back. Today she was breaking that rule. She stepped out of the car, heels clicking lightly on the pavement, and walked through the front gate. A child's laughter echoed from the back lot, a different child in a different time. She paused, took a breath, and walked inside. The lobby smelled of lemon cleaner and something nostalgic, paper maybe, or sunlight filtered through old curtains. A woman with warm eyes and a sunflower pin on her sweater looked up from the front desk. "Hi there," she said with a smile. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Mira replied, her voice calm but threaded with nerves. "I used to live here. A long time ago, back when it was still St. Augustine." The woman's eyes widened slightly with recognition. "Oh, wow. That was before my time, but we still have some of the old records. I'm Karen, the director here." Mira extended her hand. "Mira Langston." Karen blinked. "Wait, the Mira Langston." Mira offered a modest smile. "Yes, but today I'm just someone looking for a piece of the past." Karen softened. "Of course, come with me." She led Mira down a narrow hallway that smelled of chalk and old stories. They entered a small records room with metal shelves and folders marked by year. Mira scanned the rows of manila files with a strange ache in her chest. "I'm looking for records around 1996, specifically children in the girls' wing who were later adopted out." Karen pulled a step stool and reached for a top shelf. "It's all been digitized, but I like to keep the physical stuff. It reminds us these were real lives, not just entries in a system." She handed Mira a faded binder labeled Girls 1996-1998. Mira sat at a desk and began turning pages slowly. There she was, entry Najir 412, Amira Daniels, age 6, taken into care after abandonment. Adopted by the Langston family 2 years later. Attached to her file was a scanned drawing, a stick figure girl with long black hair standing next to a giant sun. Her breath caught. On the back of the page, scribbled in messy, childish handwriting, "I like songs. The boy sings to me. Don't tell." Mira's throat tightened. She hadn't remembered writing that. But it was hers. Karen stepped out to give her space. Mira flipped through to the boys' section. She didn't know what she was looking for, just something that would make it real. She had no last name, no face to match to Cal. Just the music. Then she found it. Caleb Jennings, age 7. Transferred mid-year to another facility. Not adopted. There was no photo. Just a note in the margin. Shows musical aptitude. Comforts other children. Emotionally withdrawn after March transition. March. That was when the songs stopped. Mira closed the binder, her heart pounding. It was him. She felt an ache of guilt, of gratitude, of something nameless that had waited decades to surface. Back at the front desk, Karen was chatting softly with a social worker. Mira waited until they finished, then asked, "Would you happen to have any archives of creative activities from that time? Drawings, letters, maybe music?" Karen smiled. "We have boxes. Kids used to write their own little lullabies or poems. Some of it's heartbreaking. Some, oddly, beautiful." She brought out a shoebox-sized container labeled Creative Writing, 1990s, and placed it on the table. Mira opened it slowly. Inside were construction paper collages, crayon scribbles, torn notebook pages. She flipped carefully through them until she saw it. A page folded 3 times, slightly faded. In pencil. "Stars don't sleep. They only shine quieter at night. Close your eyes, little bird. I'll be here." Out of sight. Her hand trembled. At the bottom, signed in shaky handwriting, CJ. She pressed the paper to her chest. For a long moment she sat in silence as the air seemed to shift around her, like the building was whispering back. When she finally stood to leave, she turned to Karen. "You run this place with a lot of heart," Mira said. "We try," Karen replied gently. "It's hard, but every now and then we hear that something we did, or didn't even know we did, mattered." Mira nodded slowly. "Someone here once sang to me through a vent. I think it changed the trajectory of my whole life. I just didn't know it until yesterday." That night, Mira sat in her penthouse, the poem laid out before her on the dining table. She stared at it like it might disappear. Cal had no idea he had given her this, that he had been her lifeline. But now she had something to give back. She picked up her phone and opened the draft for the Community Roots Initiative proposal she'd shelved years ago. Then, without hesitation, she typed a new title across the top, "The CJ Project Giving Hope a Voice." This time, it wasn't a corporate pitch. It was a promise. The light in the kitchen flickered for the third time that morning, a stuttering blink that Cal could almost time with the beat of his pulse. He sighed and jiggled the overhead switch like it might magically fix everything wrong in their rented apartment. It didn't. He glanced over his shoulder. Lila sat at the tiny kitchen table, crayons scattered in front of her tongue sticking out in concentration as she drew a picture of what looked like a large, smiling dinosaur and a man with a guitar. "That me?" he asked, pouring the last of the cereal into her bowl. "No milk today." She nodded without looking up. "You and me at the park. You're singing. The dinosaur's just visiting." Cal chuckled softly and ruffled her hair. She didn't know how thin the walls were getting, how much rent was overdue, how few groceries were left. He'd sold a few tools and his amp online the night before just to cover daycare for the week. But Lila was still drawing dinosaurs. That counted for something. As he rinsed out the cereal box and dropped it into the recycling, a knock came at the door. Not the kind that startled a polite, almost hesitant rhythm. Cal wiped his hands and opened it. Mira Langston stood there. Today she wore jeans and a forest green jacket instead of her usual business armor. Her hair was tied back, a single notebook in hand. Still, she looked like someone who knew how to command a room, or a boardroom, or a nation. "Hey," she said simply. Cal blinked, caught somewhere between surprise and confusion. Hi. I hope this isn't a bad time," she added quickly. "I wasn't sure how else to reach you." He stepped aside and let her in, still unsure what this visit was. Mira scanned the small apartment quickly but not judgmentally. She noted the neatly folded laundry on the couch, the stack of library books by the TV, and the absence of clutter. Cal's pride lived in every corner of this space. "I brought something," she said, holding up the notebook. Lila peeked over the top of her dinosaur. "Is that the lady from the park?" Mira smiled and crouched to her level. "It is, and you must be the dinosaur artist. I'm Lila. Hi, Lila. I'm Mira. I liked your dad's singing very much." Lila beamed and went back to her drawing. Cal crossed his arms, still cautious. "So, what brings you here, really?" Mira straightened. "I've been thinking about your situation, about how we crossed paths again. And I realized something. You helped me once when we were both just kids and didn't know what helping even meant." "You don't owe me anything," Cal said quickly. "I'm not offering charity," she replied just as fast. "I'm offering an opportunity. For both of us." She opened the notebook and laid it on the table between them. Inside were sketches of a program, a community arts initiative, job placement support for single parents, after-school care for their kids. There were bullet points, ideas, grant partners, potential venue spaces. "The CJ Project," Cal read aloud. His voice hesitated over the initials. "You inspired the name," she said softly. He looked up at her, guarded. "Why me? Because I know what it's like to grow up invisible. I know what it's like to think the world's done with you before you've even started. And I also know that one voice, one kind word, one song can be enough to shift something inside someone forever." Cal exhaled slowly and leaned back in the chair. "I'm starting this project whether you say yes or not. But I want you to be part of it. You could help design the music side. Teach, perform. Help kids who feel like they've been thrown away remember that they're not." He was quiet. Mira continued gentler now. "You wouldn't just be staff. You'd help lead, shape the whole thing." Cal glanced at Lila, then back at Mira. "You have no idea what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask. he muttered. I do, she said simply. That's exactly why I'm here. He shook his head, the walls coming up fast. You're rich. You have power. You show up in a nice coat and hand me a plan like it's going to fix everything. It won't fix everything, she agreed. But it might fix something. It might give you some ground to stand on. Silence stretched between them. Then Cal stood. I've had a lot of people say they wanted to help, he said. Most of them disappeared before the sentence ended. Mira looked at him, not flinching, not pushing. I'm still here. He studied her for a moment longer, and in that moment something shifted. Not enough to trust, but enough to listen. You'd need a space, he said, finally. In a neighborhood that people actually live in, not some glass-walled loft next to a Whole Foods. Mira smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Later that evening, after Mira left, Cal sat at the same table staring at the notebook she'd let him keep. Lila crawled into his lap and looked at the page again. Are you going to sing to other kids too? She asked. I don't know yet, he answered honestly. Maybe they're scared of thunderstorms like me. He kissed the top of her head. Yeah, maybe. He didn't know if it would work, if it was real, if he had the right to believe in something this big again. But the wall inside him, the one built from years of being let down, had a crack in it now. And through it, just faintly light was beginning to come through. The rain came that night, not the kind that howled or slammed against windows, but the steady, whispering kind that dripped from rooftops and ran in quiet rivulets along sidewalks. Cal liked this kind of rain. It reminded him of things he couldn't name, things long buried under the grind of survival. Lila was asleep early, curled into her blanket like a kitten clutching her well-loved stuffed raccoon. Cal had turned off the lights, leaving only the soft yellow glow from the kitchen to spill across the small living room. On the table, Mira's notebook lay open again, pages filled with possibility. Real possibility. It terrified him. He sat on the edge of the couch, guitar resting across his knees. He hadn't played since Mira's visit. Something about it felt different now, like the music wasn't just his anymore. Instinctively, he reached down and ran his fingers along the inside of the guitar case. A loose piece of lining had always bugged him, and he'd meant to glue it down for months. Tonight, his nail caught on the edge of it again, but this time it peeled back slightly more than before. Curious, he pulled gently. Beneath the lining, tucked deep into the corner seam, was a folded piece of notebook paper. Yellowed. Fragile. He frowned. Carefully, he opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably a child's. Letters uneven, some backward, written in thick pencil strokes. Stars don't sleep. They only shine quieter at night. Close your eyes, little bird. I'll be here, out of sight. Cal's breath caught in his chest. He remembered that paper. Not where he found it, not how it had ended up in his guitar case, but the words, those were his, or at least they had been once. He read it again, and again. At the bottom was something he didn't remember writing. A small drawing of a bird in a nest, and next to it 2 stick figures. One with a long braid. One holding what looked like a guitar. Then he saw the initials A.D. Amira Daniels. His hands shook. The name came back to him in pieces. Amira, the girl in the bunk 2 doors down, the one who never talked to anyone who cried at night when she thought no one could hear. He'd hummed through the vent once just to drown her out. Then again, the next night, because something in him hated the sound of her crying. And eventually, she'd hummed back. They had never spoken face to face, but for weeks, maybe months, they had been something like friends. Or, at least, survivors of the same system. He pressed the paper flat on the table, heart pounding. A.D. Amira Daniels, Mira Langston. It couldn't be, except it made perfect sense. The careful way she'd asked questions, the song, her presence at the park, the way she said, I think maybe you helped me survive something I didn't know how to survive. He sat back slowly, staring at the note. His throat felt tight. It wasn't just that they'd met again. It was that she had remembered. And he hadn't. Not until now. The guilt hit him fast, hot, and sharp. How could he forget her? Forget what they'd shared? And why had she remembered Carrie had come back? Cal wasn't good with being seen. Years of practice had taught him to live in the margins, to take up as little space as possible. But Mira had looked straight through his defenses, not with pity, but with history. And now he knew why. The next morning, the sun came up behind a veil of mist. Lila tugged at his hoodie as they walked the 2 blocks to daycare. "Daddy, what's wrong? You didn't sing this morning." "Sorry, Bug," he said, gently brushing her cheek. "Just thinking." "Is it the rain?" she asked, scanning the sky like it had betrayed her. "No," he said, and kissed her forehead. "It's a good kind of thinking." She nodded, satisfied, and skipped ahead toward the gate. Cal turned, heading toward the cafe Mira had suggested for their next meeting. She was waiting outside when he arrived, coffee in hand, wrapped in a soft gray scarf. She looked warmer than she had that first day in the park, less guarded. But when she saw him, something in her posture straightened, like she was bracing for something she couldn't quite name. "You found it, didn't you?" she asked before he could speak. He blinked. "The note." Mira's eyes softened. "I was hoping you would. I couldn't be sure. I didn't remember," not fully, Cal admitted. "But reading it was like hearing the song for the first time again." "I never stopped hearing it," she said quietly. Cal looked away for a second, then met her eyes again. "Why didn't you just tell me? Because I didn't want it to feel like I was chasing a ghost," she said. "Or pressuring you into remembering something that maybe didn't matter to you." "It did," he said, "more than I can explain." They stood in silence for a moment. "I kept that guitar all these years," he continued. "Through 6 apartments, a storage unit, 2 cities, and that note stayed hidden the whole time. I think maybe I wasn't supposed to see it until now." Mira smiled softly. "Maybe that's the way memory works. It comes when we're ready to carry it again." Cal studied her, the scarf around her neck, the calm in her voice, the quiet force that had driven her back into his life, not out of nostalgia, but with purpose. "You really want me to help lead this thing?" he asked. "I want you to help build it," she replied. "Because it was you who taught me that some people give without asking for anything back. I think it's time the world learned how to do that again." He nodded, slow but certain. "I'm in," he said. Not because he needed a job, but because for the first time in a long time he felt like someone worth building something with. And this time, it wasn't about saving anyone. It was about remembering that someone once sang through a wall just to make sure a girl didn't feel alone. And that kindness, however small, was enough to echo through a lifetime. Mira stood at the window of her apartment, arms wrapped tightly around herself as the early evening lights of Boston blinked to life below. Her reflection in the glass looked like someone she didn't quite recognize, calm on the surface but storming underneath. She'd always been good at control. Good at setting boundaries, holding her emotions at arm's length, pushing herself further than necessary just to keep from looking back. But ever since Cal found that note, since they both remembered something had cracked open inside her. Not a wound. A door. And now they stood on either side of it, waiting to see who would walk through first. That morning, they'd met again, this time in the drafty auditorium of a once-abandoned community center in Roxbury that Mira's company had recently purchased for renovation. The floorboards creaked. The ceiling leaked near the back wall, but there was sunlight pouring through tall, dirty windows, and the bones of the place whispered promise. Cal stood near the makeshift stage, looking up at the rafters. "This could work. It has good bones," Mira agreed, stepping beside him. "Needs soul, though." He turned to her. "That's what we bring, isn't it?" She smiled, and for a moment they just stood there. Not CEO and candidate. Not strangers with a strange connection. But 2 people who had once comforted each other through vents and silence, finding each other again in a world that didn't usually give second chances. Then, without warning, the smile faded from Cal's face. He looked away. "I need to tell you something," he said. Mira waited, watching the muscles in his jaw twitch as if he were holding in words that had rusted with time. "I wasn't always like this," he said. "Tired, guarded. I used to think I was going somewhere. Music school, maybe. Touring. Writing songs that mattered." "You still write songs that matter?" she said softly. He shook his head. "I used to have a plan. But life doesn't always care about your plans. One bad fall, one medical bill, one moment of weakness, and suddenly everything you thought was solid turns to sand." He paused, then added, "Lila's mom. She left 2 months after Lila was born. Said she couldn't do it. Couldn't live in poverty. Couldn't handle a baby and a broke musician." Mira said nothing. She knew this was sacred ground, grief unspoken. "I never blamed her," Cal continued. "Well, not forever. We were both drowning. I just held on to the kid and decided I'd swim harder. But some days I was scared I'd drop her." His voice cracked then. "Not much. Just enough." "I know that fear," Mira whispered. He looked at her surprised. "I was adopted into a good home," she explained, "but for years I felt like I was just pretending to be the kind of daughter they deserved. I had night terrors until I was 12. I'd wake up screaming about people disappearing, and I'd hide under the bed because I thought if I stayed too visible, someone might send me back." Cal exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 20 years. "It never leaves, does it?" he asked. "No," she replied. "But it doesn't have to define us either." Later, they walked through the old classrooms and side halls discussing logistics, renovation timelines, local artist involvement, potential donors. But beneath the practical talk was a current neither could ignore. By the time they reached the front doors again, the sky had darkened. The first rumble of thunder echoed faintly in the distance. Mira paused. Cal glanced over. "You okay?" She hesitated. "I haven't liked storms since I was a kid," she admitted. "Especially thunder. I used to count the seconds between flashes and cracks, hoping if I could predict the sound, it wouldn't scare me as much." Cal nodded slowly. "That's why I started humming." She turned to him. "The first night I heard you crying through the vents, he said I didn't know what to do. So I just started humming. Figured if I was scared, you probably were too. You never knew it helped," she said. "I never knew you remembered," he replied. They stood there as the sky opened. Rain poured across the cracked pavement outside, soft at first, then heavier. The kind of storm that invited silence. And in that silence, Mira said, "We were kids. Lost to scared. But what you did for me, it was more than kindness. It was an anchor." He swallowed hard. "I didn't think I mattered that much." "You did," she said. "You still do." She reached into her bag and pulled out the note, his note now encased in a clear plastic sleeve to protect it from time and weather. "I've kept everything in my life neat," she continued. "Organized. Predictable. But this, you were the one wild thread I never let go of, even when I didn't know I was still holding it." Cal looked at the paper, then at her. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic music, just two people standing in a forgotten building in the middle of a thunderstorm, staring at a memory that changed both of them. Then he reached for her hand. Not tightly, just enough. Enough to say, "I remember too. I'm still here. Let's not run from it anymore." Outside, thunder rolled again. But inside, the storm finally began to pass. The room echoed with the sound of an out-of-tune piano and the hum of scaffolding being hoisted near the ceiling beams. Dust danced through the filtered afternoon light pouring in from the tall, now uncovered windows of the community center's main hall. The transformation was slow but steady. Cracked tiles replaced with fresh flooring, faded paint covered with warm earth tones, and the musty silence replaced with the cautious rhythm of people returning to build something new. Cal stood near the old stage sleeves, rolled up his guitar strapped loosely around his shoulder. He'd just finished tuning the instrument after helping a crew unload donated chairs, and now he waited. Nervous, unsure. Mira stepped in from the side entrance, clipboard in hand, her tailored coat traded for a navy blue cardigan, hair swept back into a simple braid. She looked lighter. Not casual exactly, but present. More herself than he'd ever seen her. "You ready?" she asked. He looked at her like a man balancing on a wire. Not even close. "Good," she said. "That means you'll feel everything." He let out a nervous laugh. "I haven't performed for anyone in years. I used to play Delilah in the back of our van. That's a far cry from a room full of strangers." "They're not strangers," Mira said. "They're pieces of the same world we came from, just waiting to be reminded it can sound like music again." Cal inhaled deeply and nodded. Today was their first soft launch, a test event. A mix of donors, volunteers, local families, and community leaders had been invited for a casual preview of the program's vision. Music Art exhibits kid-friendly performances. No press, no speeches, just a shared moment. And at the center of it, the man who had once sung through a wall, now singing on a stage. Later that evening, the small crowd filled the room with gentle conversation and folding chairs. String lights glowed above like quiet stars. On one side of the hall, kids showcased hand-painted posters about dreams. On another, parents stood by tables of finger food and cider, many of them first-time visitors unsure what to expect. When Cal stepped onto the low platform, the room slowly hushed. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat. "I'm not used to this," he admitted, smiling nervously. "Most of my shows are in living rooms with stuffed animals and one very enthusiastic 6-year-old. Laughter rippled through the room. He looked down at his guitar. "But someone once told me that what matters isn't how many people hear you, it's whether someone needs to hear you. So, if this finds anyone tonight, then it's worth it." He began to play. The first few chords were gentle, familiar. Then came the melody, soft, warm, haunting in the way truth often is. And when he sang the first line, a hush fell so complete, it felt as though the walls themselves were listening. "Stars don't sleep. They just shine quieter at night. Close your eyes, little bird. I'll be here, out of sight." Mira stood at the edge of the room near the back, arms folded across her chest, but not to shield herself. Only to hold the moment still. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't blink. She didn't want to miss a second. Around her, people leaned in. A few mothers held their children tighter. One elderly woman in the corner closed her eyes and smiled. Someone exhaled softly through tears. When the final chord faded, the silence didn't immediately lift. It hovered like the last breath of a dream you didn't want to wake from. Then came applause. Not thunderous, but heartfelt. Whole. Cal stepped back from the mic, a little stunned, as if unsure whether the moment had actually happened. But then Lila ran up to the stage, arms raised like a cheerleader, and he caught her grinning as she shouted, "That's my daddy." The room laughed, clapped louder, and just like that, the spell transformed into joy. An hour later, after guests had filtered out and the last paper cups were tossed, Mira walked slowly back toward the stage where Cal was rapping chords. "You did it," she said softly. He turned. "We did." "No," she replied, stepping closer. "You did. You stood up and gave people something they didn't know they needed." He gave a humble shrug. It was just a song. She met his gaze unwavering. "You keep saying that, but it's never been just a song, Cal." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "I used to think music was the only part of me that had value. When I lost the rest job's money direction, I held on to the guitar like it was the last thread tying me to anything good." "And now?" she asked. "Now," he said, his voice steadier, "I think the value wasn't in the music. It was in what it reached. The kid behind the wall, the daughter in the dark, the woman in the park." She felt her throat tighten. "And what about the man who never stopped singing?" she asked. He paused. "I think he's starting to believe he said that he was worth hearing after all." They stood close now, not touching, but surrounded by the quiet hum of something unspoken rising. Then, softly, Mira said, I want to add a new section to the program. A recording studio. Just one room. Simple but warm. A place for voices that were never heard when they should have been. Cal blinked, then smiled. You really never do anything halfway, do you? I had to fight to be heard, she replied. Now I want to build places where no one has to. He nodded. I'd help lead that. I know. They stood together for a while, looking around the half-finished room that had just become something more than walls and wires. It had become a sanctuary. For songs, for silence, for second chances, and for the quiet realization that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer the world is your voice when you thought you had none left. The sun was barely up when the email arrived. Cal stared at it for a long moment, blinking twice just to make sure he was reading it right. The subject line was simple but jarring. Request for feature. The voice from the shelter. Boston Community Spotlight. It had come from a local lifestyle journalist, someone Mira had mentioned in passing weeks ago, but Cal never thought much of it. According to the email, they wanted to run a full feature a father who used music to help his daughter who turned childhood trauma into a platform for healing others. There was even talk of a segment on the regional morning news. Cal's hands hovered over the keyboard. Then he closed the laptop. He didn't feel ready. Later that morning, he stood in the renovated music room at the community center, his fingers brushing over the soundboard. Mira's vision for the CJ project was unfolding rapidly. Small classes had already started, and weekend workshops were drawing more families than they'd anticipated. The community was responding. Donors were calling. Parents were asking how to get their kids involved. For the first time in years, Cal wasn't just surviving, he was creating something that lasted beyond a paycheck. But fame, publicity. That wasn't what he signed up for. He turned when he heard Mira's footsteps behind him. She held a copy of the email in her hand, printed as if she knew he wouldn't bring it up himself. You saw it, she asked gently. I saw it, and I don't want this to turn into a circus. Mira nodded, not surprised. It doesn't have to. But people are noticing, and some of them need to hear what you've lived. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. Cal shook his head. What if they start digging into my past? Into Lila's mom? Into everything I failed at? You didn't fail, Mira said firmly. You stayed. You fought. You built. And that story is exactly why people will listen. But what if they think I'm just some charity case who got lucky with the right woman showing up at the right time? Mira's gaze softened, but her tone stayed steady. Then, maybe they'll also see a man who could have shut the door on that woman but didn't, who kept showing up for his kid when no one showed up for him. He looked away, jaw tight. You think this is about me? She continued, stepping closer, but it's not. It's about every father out there who thinks he has to disappear in order to protect his kid from disappointment. It's about every child still waiting to hear a lullaby through the wall. That silenced him. Because somewhere deep down, he knew she was right. That weekend, the article went live. The title, From Vents to Voices. One Father's Song of Survival. There was a photo of Cal sitting on the edge of the community center's new stage Lila in his lap, both of them smiling mid-laugh. The story detailed his journey, not just the music, but the loneliness, the failures, the quiet acts of perseverance. It also mentioned Mira not as a savior, but as someone whose past ran parallel to his. A reunion, not of romance, but of recognition. The piece was gentle, respectful, but it was enough to ripple. Social media picked it up. Other nonprofits reached out, teachers, therapists, single parents. Emails poured into the community center's inbox with the subject line, "That story saved me," or "I thought I was alone." It was overwhelming, and then the inevitable. A local morning show called. They wanted both Cal and Mira to appear for a 10-minute live interview. Cal resisted, hard, but Mira had a plan. "You don't have to go," she said calmly the day before the segment. "But I'd like to." He studied her, unsure. She smiled. "You once gave me your voice. Let me return the favor." The next morning, Cal stood in his kitchen watching the segment on his laptop while Lila ate cereal at the table. Mira looked poised, radiant on camera, but real. She spoke from the heart about growing up in the foster system, about loneliness, about the power of small kindnesses that echo into adulthood. When the interviewer asked about the man behind the music, Mira didn't flinch. "He's not a headline," she said. "He's a father who chose to stay when staying was hard. He's the voice I heard when I was most afraid. And now he's making sure other people hear their own." Cal felt his throat tighten. Lila, spoon in midair, said, "She's talking about you." He nodded. "She's really nice," Lila added, then paused. "Do you like her?" Cal blinked. "What you look at her like when you sing my favorite song. The one with the stars." He laughed, surprised. "You notice that I notice everything," Lila said proudly, then shoveled more cereal into her mouth. That evening, as twilight settled in, Cal walked to the park with Lila on his shoulders. She giggled as she reached for leaves overhead, feet kicking gently against his chest. They passed the old bench, the same one where this all began. And there, as if drawn by gravity, stood Mira. She was watching the sky. He stopped beside her. "You did well this morning," he said. "I spoke the truth," she replied. "That's easier when it's not about you." Cal glanced up at the fading light. She said, "I look at you the way I sing her favorite song." Mira turned. "Is that a good thing, I think," he said. "Slowly, it means you're safe, familiar, and kind of essential." They both smiled quietly. No rush, no declarations, just something forming between them, slow and solid, like a melody returning after a long pause. Mira looked at Lila now, curled against Cal's shoulder, drowsy from the walk. "She's lucky," she whispered. "So am I," Cal said, without hesitation. And in that quiet moment beneath the soft wash of dusk and memory, they stood together, not as headlines or projects or ghosts of who they once were, but as a man, a woman, and a child, each of them learning how to be seen, and heard, and whole. The air inside the community center buzzed with the anticipation of something just beyond definition, something not quite a performance, not quite a fundraiser, and far more than either. Tonight was the gala. Not a black tie affair, but a heart-crafted celebration. A culmination of months of work, of late-night rehearsals, chipped paint, and grant proposals. There were fairy lights strung across the ceiling beams, a makeshift stage surrounded by mismatched folding chairs and tables covered in hand-painted tablecloths from the art therapy program. For Cal, it was surreal. He stood behind the curtain on stage left, adjusting the strap of his guitar for the 10th time, his pulse tapping against his ribs like a frantic metronome. Mira had named the event The First Note, as if to remind them all that this wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. He peeked through the curtain. The room was packed. Families from the shelter program, donors in worn suits and borrowed dresses, local musicians, and teens who used to skip school now volunteering to serve punch. And in the third row, with her hair in a lopsided braid and her best sparkly dress, sat Lila, kicking her legs and watching the stage like it was the doorway to magic. Next to her sat Mira. She looked elegant but unpretentious, her dress simple, her expression focused, serene, and strong. She met Cal's eyes, and in that brief glance he found stillness. He stepped back, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. It wasn't just a song tonight. It was a full circle. Backstage, one of the center's teen volunteers ran up holding a flash drive and looking panicked. "Mr. Cal. The AV guy says your intro video's missing from the folder." Cal frowned. "It should be on there. I double-checked. We've only got Mira's speech in the slideshow." Cal sighed, ready to head toward the tech table, but Mira appeared instead, walking calmly toward the chaos like she was made for it. "I took it out," she said gently. Cal blinked. "What?" She placed a hand on his arm. "You don't need a video to tell your story, Cal. You are the story. Tonight you show them the voice that never gave up." He hesitated, unsure. But then she said, This song doesn't need anything else. Just your heart, and maybe a little bit of courage." He smiled. "A little bit, huh?" Okay, she admitted, maybe a lot. When Cal walked onto the stage, the applause surprised him. It was full-bodied, not polite, earned. He stood at the mic, cleared his throat, and let the quiet settle. The lights warmed his face. He didn't have notes, didn't need them. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he said, voice steady despite the tremble in his chest, "for believing that stories don't end where pain begins." A few people nodded. Some murmured agreement. One woman dabbed her eyes already. "I didn't grow up thinking I'd be here on a stage playing music surrounded by people who care. I thought I'd always be on the outside trying not to take up too much space." He glanced at Mira. "But someone once told me that kindness doesn't disappear, it just waits for the right moment to be seen again. And sometimes a song is the only way we know how to say, 'I'm still here.' So tonight, I want to sing the first song I ever truly wrote. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And I sang it through a wall to a little girl who needed it." He looked at Mira, and though no one else could see the full story in that moment, it was enough for her to reach up, press a hand to her chest, and smile like she'd never smiled before. He turned to the mic and began. "Stars don't sleep. They just shine quieter at night. Close your eyes, little bird, I'll be here." Out of sight. His voice wasn't flawless, but it was true. The room stilled utterly still as the words floated out like something sacred. Mira's fingers curled over Lila's, who leaned against her shoulder without looking away. No phones, no flashes, just the sound of one voice, and the silence of 100 people remembering what it felt like to be safe. As the final note faded, no one moved. Then came the sound. Not just applause, but the slow rise of people standing, one by one, like they knew the weight of what they had witnessed. Cal stood still, overwhelmed, until Lila broke from the row and ran up the steps, arms flung wide. He scooped her up, held her tightly, and for once didn't try to hide the tears. She whispered in his ear, "You were amazing, Daddy." He whispered back, "So were you, baby." Mira approached the stage, eyes glistening. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply reached out, took his free hand, and held it like an anchor in the middle of a sea of light. Later that night, as the chairs were folded and lights dimmed, Cal stood in the entryway, watching as families lingered, laughing, hugging, holding on to something they hadn't known they needed. Mira joined him, her coat draped over her arm. "You realize you just started something," she said. "I think we both did," he replied. She nodded. "There's still so much to do." "I know. But tonight was what the song was meant for." Cal turned to her. "I think it was meant for this, all of it. You, me, Lila, every kid who'll walk through that door and wonder if they matter." She looked at him, eyes soft. "And when they do, we'll be here," he said, singing, until they believe it. And outside, beneath a quiet sky of city stars, soft, persistent, and alive, Boston exhaled. And somewhere in that exhale, a boy and a girl who once survived a shelter found what they had unknowingly built together. A place where no voice went unheard. A home made of song. The snow fell softly that morning. Flakes slow and weightless, like the world had exhaled overnight and decided to let everything rest just for a while. Inside the community center, the warmth wasn't just from the radiators or the fresh brewed coffee in the corner, it came from the voices. Children laughing down the hall during a songwriting workshop. A mother humming along to a tune in the art room. An older man with trembling hands helping a boy tune a second-hand guitar. There was music everywhere, not loud or flashy, but woven into the walls, into the breath of the place. And at the heart of it stood Cal. He was kneeling beside Lila near the large mural the kids had painted along the far wall. She pointed proudly at the small bird she had drawn, nestled on a branch next to a guitar, and two figures hand in hand under a night sky. "That's you and Mira," she said confidently. "And me." Cal smiled. "You think so, I know. So Lila replied, hands on her hips like a miniature general. And the bird is the song, because songs fly even when people can't. He pulled her into his arms and whispered into her hair, "You're the best song I've ever written." Behind him, Mira approached with a clipboard. Her pace unhurried, her expression soft. She wore her favorite gray wool coat, the sleeves pushed up to reveal the ink stains on her wrist, remnants from scribbling notes with the kids earlier that morning. "We're over capacity again," she said, but it wasn't a complaint. Cal chuckled. "Good thing we're getting that grant next month." She smiled, still pretending you're not one of the reasons we're getting it. Just trying to stay humble. "Well, you failed," she teased. They stood there watching the room around them bloom with life. What had once been cracked tiles and forgotten walls was now a place where music and memory danced together. Mira reached into her coat and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you." Cal raised an eyebrow. "Is it another funding proposal?" "Open it." He carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a vinyl record, handmade. The label was simple, printed in block letters, the CJ Sessions, Volume 1. Voices that made it. Below that, dedicated to the ones who sang in silence. Cal stared at it, blinking fast. "This is the first official project from the recording studio," Mira said. "All the kids who've written original songs this year. We pressed a limited batch. Yours is the first copy." His voice caught. "You're amazing. You're the reason it exists," she said. "You helped us hear what mattered." He stepped forward, closed the space between them. "I didn't know how much I needed to be heard until someone like you actually listened." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "And I didn't know how much I needed to believe in people again until you sang that song." Silence settled between them, warm and weightless like the snow outside. Cal reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. They walked together to the front windows, watching the snow fall outside over Boston's rooftops. Lila sat nearby, coloring again, humming the lullaby under her breath. Stars don't sleep. They just shine quieter at night. It had been months since that afternoon in the park, since the note in the guitar case, since the realization that they had known each other long before they had met. Now, nothing between them felt like coincidence. Only timing, hard-earned, worth waiting for. Mira leaned her head on Cal's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how unlikely this was every day?" he said. "But then I remember that the things most worth finding usually start out quiet, like a voice through a wall, or a girl at a park who didn't walk away." She smiled against him. Outside, a family approached the front doors, mother, father, 2 kids in hand-me-down coats. They hesitated on the steps, unsure. Mira turned to Cal. "Want to do the honors?" He stepped forward and opened the door wide. "Welcome," he said, voice warm. "Come in from the cold." And they did. 1 month later. A photograph went up in the main hallway, a simple frame. Inside it, a young girl's drawing a bird on a branch, 2 people holding hands under a night sky, and a single lyric scrawled in bright purple crayon beneath "Even quiet songs can save someone." The plaque beside it read, "The Voice from the Shelter Founded 2025. A place where no child is forgotten, where every voice has a home." And so the song lived on. Not just in chords and verses, but in kindness offered, doors opened, and lives rewritten. Because sometimes the most extraordinary miracles aren't loud or obvious. They begin in silence and rise when someone finally listens. A struggling single dad got a midnight call by mistake. But she said, "I needed you more than ever." The rain had come in sideways all evening, pounding the tin roof of the modest bungalow like an angry drummer. Liam Carter wiped his boots on the mat just inside the door and quietly locked it behind him. The clock above the mantel read 12:01 a.m. The living room was dim lit only by the soft glow of a vintage floor lamp and the flickering television screen now playing static. Emma had fallen asleep on the sofa, picture book still open in her lap, her cheeks flushed with sleep. He walked over, gently adjusted the blanket around her, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred, but didn't wake. Liam paused there for a moment, watching her. She was the reason he kept going, the reason he kept breathing. He'd worked a double shift patching an emergency boiler leak in a rundown apartment block where the heating had failed. His fingers were cracked and raw from the cold, the tips still stained with rust and sealant. But it wasn't the work that tired him. It was the silence. The silence that used to be filled with laughter. With her voice. He reached for his phone, which sat charging on the kitchen counter. One missed call from a number he didn't recognize. He frowned. Wrong number, maybe. Then it rang again. Liam stared at the screen. Unknown number. The digital clock on the microwave read 12:04 a.m. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to ignore it. Nothing good ever came from a midnight call. But something in the timing and the strange stillness of the room made his hand move. He answered. There was silence, and then a soft breath. Fragile. Unstable. A woman's voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call. I know I shouldn't. Liam blinked, confused. It's all right. Who is this? Another pause. Her voice was trembling now, raw and full of something he hadn't heard in a long time, desperation. I thought I dialed someone else. I just needed to hear someone's voice. I'm sorry. He could have ended it there. Could have said goodnight and hung up. But something in her tone caught him by the throat. A note of something brittle, like glass about to shatter. What's your name? He asked gently. She didn't answer, just let out a shaky breath. I'm not okay, she whispered. I'm not okay, and I don't know how to fix it anymore. Liam's breath caught. The room around him felt suddenly smaller. You don't have to fix it all tonight, he said. You just have to make it through tonight. There was silence, but she didn't hang up. Where are you? He asked. She gave a choked laugh. I'm not going to jump off a building if that's what you're asking. He sat down at the kitchen table, his back aching. That's not what I asked. She paused, and for the first time her voice steadied just barely. I'm sitting in my car. I left a party. Everyone was laughing. I felt like I was watching strangers through glass. So I walked out. You called the wrong number, he said quietly. Maybe she murmured. Or maybe I didn't. The rain continued tapping on the windows. Emma stirred again in her sleep, murmuring something inaudible. Liam glanced over and smiled just barely. Then his attention returned to the line. I don't know who you are, she continued, but your voice, it's calm, like you're someone who's used to holding things together when they're falling apart. He let that hang there for a moment. Then he said softly, I lost someone. A long time ago. I learned how to sound steady. Doesn't mean I am. There was a soft sound, something like a sob, trying to stay hidden. I don't want to go home tonight, she whispered. Everything there reminds me I'm not enough. That I failed. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbow on the table, eyes fixed on nothing. Whoever told you that lied, he said. How would you know? Because I've been there. And the truth is, the only people who say you're not enough are the ones who fear they never were. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, what's your name? He hesitated. Liam. Another pause. I'm Sophie. They didn't say anything else for a while, just listened to the sound of each other's breathing. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt held. Eventually, she said, Thank you, Liam, for answering. And then, without warning, the call disconnected. Liam stared at the phone. His own reflection blinked back at him in the dark screen. He sat there a long time. Then he rose, walked over to the sofa, and kissed Emma's forehead. Good night, baby girl, he whispered. And in the quiet, where once there had been nothing, there was now a name. Sophie, and a voice he couldn't forget. Liam didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch across from his daughter, staring at the ceiling as the old radiator hummed quietly in the background. Outside, the rain had turned to a light mist drifting through the porch light like breath on a winter window pane. Sophie. That was all he had. A name, a voice, and 1,000 silent questions. He didn't know what she looked like, didn't know where she lived, what she did for a living, or what had driven her to make that call. But none of it mattered. What stayed with him wasn't the details. It was the weight in her voice, the ache buried in every syllable. He knew that ache. He'd carried it himself. By morning, Emma was back to her bright-eyed self. She bounced around the kitchen in her pajamas, requesting blueberry pancakes with exactly 3 chocolate chips per side, a Carter family tradition. Liam, bleary-eyed but smiling, obliged. "Did you dream last night?" she asked, climbing into the chair across from him. He poured the batter and glanced at her. "Yeah, I think I did." "What about a woman in the dark?" he said, then paused, and a voice I couldn't forget. Emma tilted her head in that curious way she did when she was trying to understand something beyond her years. "Did she say something scary?" Liam flipped a pancake, letting the thought hang in the air. "No," he said softly. "She said something honest." That evening, after Liam tucked Emma into bed and turned out the light, he sat on the porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, listening to the quiet. The moon hung low, casting silver across the cracked pavement of the street below. The town was winding down, lights flicking off in windows, cars pulling into driveways. His phone buzzed just as he was about to set it down. Unknown number, 12:03 a.m. His heart thudded. For a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail, but he didn't. He swiped to answer. "Hello." There was silence, then a breath. "It's me again," she said, her voice low and cautious. "I know I shouldn't have called. I couldn't stop thinking about last night." He exhaled slowly. "Neither could I." A pause. Then quieter. "I thought you wouldn't answer." "I wasn't sure I would," Liam admitted, "but I'm glad I did." She let out a small, almost nervous laugh. "Me too." This time she didn't sound quite so broken. Still brittle, still guarded, but not splintering. There was a sliver of something in her tone. Hope, maybe. Or gratitude. They talked for 20 minutes. Not about anything profound, just little things. Favorite foods, books they'd once loved, songs they secretly cried to in the car. She still didn't offer her last name, or where she lived. And Liam didn't ask. Her identity wasn't the point. It was the connection that mattered. Over the next week, the calls became routine. Always at 12:04. Always just her voice, and his. He came to expect it, like the way dawn eventually follows night. No texting, no social media, no pictures. Just real-time, honest conversations that existed nowhere but in the space between them. Some nights were quiet, their words as sparse as stars. Other nights she cried. And he listened. He never tried to fix her. That was the key. He never offered solutions or platitudes. He didn't ask her to cheer up or stay strong. He just gave her space. And in that space, she breathed. "I'm not used to this," she said one night. "Being heard." Liam was quiet. "You're not invisible. I feel it." "Well, you're not. Not to me." Silence. Then she asked softly, "Do you ever miss her?" It was the first time she brought up his pain. He didn't hesitate. "Every day." Sophie exhaled. "How do you keep going?" Liam looked at the stars overhead. "I don't. Some days I stop. But then Emma needs breakfast, or her shoelace breaks, or she wants to know why the moon follows our car." She laughed. "Kids. Built-in purpose. Something like that." She was quiet for a long moment. Then said, almost like a prayer, "I wish someone like you had answered my call a year ago." That same night, as Liam hung up and set the phone down, Gail, the elderly neighbor from next door, stepped out onto her porch, wrapped in a thick robe and slippers. "You're out late," she called. Liam smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. She squinted. You've been smiling more lately. Less haunted. He blinked, surprised. Have I? Gail stepped down one step? Arms folded. Don't let it scare you. Healing can feel like betrayal when grief is all you've known. Liam's throat tightened. It's not like that. I didn't say it was, she said gently. I'm just saying. It's okay. Even the quietest hearts deserve to be heard. He looked down at the phone, still glowing faintly in his palm. He didn't know where this was going. He didn't know who she was or what this would become, but something inside him had changed. He didn't feel numb anymore. He felt present. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. Sophie Bennett did not believe in fate. She believed in data. In performance metrics, quarterly reports, market shifts. That's how she had built an empire, by outworking, outlasting, and outsmarting. Feelings had always been an obstacle to strategy. Vulnerability was for people who had time to fall apart. And yet ever since the first night she accidentally called him Liam, her world had begun to tilt in quiet, undeniable ways. She'd begun taking the long way home just to clear her head. She started drinking her tea without distraction, no longer drowning her thoughts in back-to-back conference calls. And worst of all, most dangerously of all, she found herself waiting for midnight. Waiting for his voice. That warm, grounded voice that never asked for anything. That never interrupted. That made her feel for the first time in years like she wasn't some malfunctioning machine. She felt like a person. Friday came heavy with clouds and an edge of frost in the air. Sophie arrived early at Bennett Media's downtown headquarters, a 20-story glass tower in the heart of the city. Her heels echoed against the marble lobby floor as she entered, nodding briefly at the security guard who greeted her like always. But nothing felt like always anymore. She walked with practiced confidence into the elevator, pressed the button for the executive floor, and stared at her reflection in the polished doors. Hair perfect. Lipstick unflawed, not a line out of place, and yet she looked unfamiliar, like someone pretending to be herself. The elevator stopped one floor early. The doors slid open and he was there. At first, Sophie didn't register him. Just another maintenance tech in a navy blue uniform toolbox and hand eyes scanning the wiring in the hallway junction box. Then their eyes met. Liam straightened slightly, his posture instinctively respectful. She was, after all, the CEO. But something flickered across his face. Something subtle. Recognition. Or maybe curiosity. Sophie's breath hitched. Her mind reeled. Could it be? He looked exactly like she had imagined. Not in appearance, but in presence. Solid. Calm. Not particularly polished, but real. Like a man who knew the weight of things and carried them anyway. She forced herself to step inside the elevator without hesitation, her heart suddenly racing. The doors closed. She stared at the panel, at the button for floor 20. But she didn't move. That was him. She knew it, but that couldn't be. Could it? That night, 12:04, came and went. No call. Liam sat on the edge of his bedphone, and hand thumb hovering over the screen. But he didn't call her. He'd seen her today. He was sure of it. The woman in the navy pantsuit, the CEO, Sophie. She hadn't said anything, but he'd seen the flicker in her eyes. She'd recognized him too. Maybe not fully, but enough to cause tension in the air between them. Now he wasn't sure what to do. For weeks he'd known her only as a voice, a feeling, a shared silence in the dark. But now she was real, tangible. A woman with influence and power, and let's be honest, an entire life far removed from his. What was he supposed to say to her now? Hey, it's me, the guy from your midnight emotional unravelings. I was just fixing your building's lighting. He rubbed a hand over his face and sighed. Maybe this was the part where things broke. Maybe it was always meant to be anonymous, a brief rescue mission for two drifting souls, nothing more. Sophie sat in her luxury apartment, light's dim glass of wine untouched beside her. Her phone rested on the coffee table like a loaded gun. She hated this feeling. Powerless, exposed, like someone had peeled back her armor and she couldn't put it back on. Why hadn't he called? Was he scared? Embarrassed worse, was he disappointed? She stood abruptly, pacing the room, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then, without giving herself time to second-guess, she reached for her phone. 12:22 a.m. She called. It rang once, then again. "Hello?" His voice was quiet, cautious. "It's me," she said. "I didn't think you were going to call tonight. I wasn't sure you'd want me to." Silence stretched. "You saw me," she said, more statement than question. "I think so," he replied. "Did you?" "I did." Another pause. And now he asked. Sophie closed her eyes. "Now I don't know how to pretend I don't know your face." Liam exhaled. "It changes things." "Yes," she said. Then added, voice trembling slightly, "But I don't know if that's bad." Liam leaned back against the headboard, feeling something shift in his chest. Something open. "I liked not knowing," he admitted. It made everything feel simpler. "I didn't," she said, "because now that I've seen you, I can't stop wondering if you'd still listen the same way knowing who I am." "I would," he said immediately. "I'd listen harder." That silenced her. Then, softly, "I didn't expect someone like you to be standing in my hallway. You seemed too kind for this world." He chuckled. "Kind doesn't pay rent." She laughed. It was short, but genuine. "No, but maybe it saves people." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You looked strong today. In control." "That's the mask," she replied. "The voice you hear at night, that's the real me. The one I try to bury in daylight." Liam's voice was steady. "Then let's keep meeting at midnight, where the masks can fall." Sophie closed her eyes. "I'd like that." They didn't speak much more after that, but both slept easier than they had in years. The following Monday arrived with the sharpness of winter returning. The air was crisp, the streets glistened with the residue of frost, and Liam found himself staring longer than usual at his reflection in the side mirror of his van before heading into work. He was scheduled for an early job routine maintenance on electrical junctions inside Bennett Media's corporate offices. Just like last week. Just like when he'd seen her. Her, Sophie. He hadn't spoken her name aloud since that last call. He wasn't sure what came next, if anything should. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. Not just her voice, but her poise. The way her eyes had locked with his for that split second. There had been recognition there. A flash of unease. Or maybe curiosity. He couldn't tell. Liam had always been good at keeping things separate, compartmentalized. His grief in one boxwork and another fatherhood in its own sacred drawer. But Sophie, she'd slipped past all that. Somehow she'd become real in his world, and now nothing was neat anymore. Up on the 20th floor, Sophie was in her glass-walled office, staring blankly at her laptop. The numbers on the spreadsheet before her might as well have been hieroglyphs. Her assistant knocked lightly and entered without waiting. "Ms. Bennett, the tech, is here to check the electricals on the west wing. Do you want him escorted?" Sophie blinked. "Is it the same guy as last week? I believe so." Liam Carter. Her breath caught in her throat. She covered it with a cough. No need to escort. Let him work. She waited until her assistant left before standing and walking slowly to the window. From there, she could see part of the hallway beyond the frosted glass. She watched the door across the floor open. Watched him step in. Same worn toolbox. Same calm gait. Same slight tilt of his shoulders as he scanned the panels on the wall. She didn't approach. She couldn't. Not yet. That night, Liam tucked Emma into bed, and as he turned off her nightlight, she spoke through a sleepy yawn. "Did you talk to your lady friend today?" He chuckled softly. "What makes you think she's my lady friend?" Emma sat up on one elbow, her curls tousled. "You smile when her name is on your phone." Liam paused. He hadn't realized he'd smiled. Not in a long time. "She's not exactly a friend," he said slowly. "We just talk." "Then maybe you should make her one," Emma mumbled, sinking back into the covers. "Friends make people feel better, like how Mrs. Gale gives us cookies when you look tired." He laughed, walked over, and kissed her forehead. "I'll think about it." When 12:04 arrived, Liam was already holding his phone. It didn't ring. At 12:05, he gave in and called her. It rang 3 times. "Hello." Her voice was breathless, not out of surprise, but anticipation. "I wasn't sure if you'd call," she said. "I wasn't sure if you wanted me to." "I waited," she whispered, "but I was afraid. I don't know what to say now that we've seen each other." "You don't have to say anything." "Yes, I do," Sophie said. "I need to explain." Liam sat down the line between them, stretching with tension. "I've never called a stranger before," she began. "Never opened myself up like that. But I was breaking. And then your voice." She paused. It felt like the only real thing I'd touched in months. He stayed quiet, letting her speak. "And now I know who you are, what you do, where you stand when you're not just a voice in the dark." He took a breath. "And I don't know how to handle that," she said honestly. "You're grounded, steady, and I feel like I'm one crisis away from shattering in public. You think I don't feel the same." Liam's voice was calm but edged with emotion. "You think I haven't had to hold my daughter in one hand and my sanity in the other." The line was silent. I wasn't trying to pretend, he continued. I just didn't want to ruin what we had by dragging it into daylight. Sophie's voice softened. "Maybe we're just scared that something good can't survive outside the dark." Liam let that sink in. Then he said, "I'd still listen. Whether you were a name a CEO or a stranger in the night, I'd still care." A shaky exhale. "Why?" "Because you never asked me to be anything but human. And that's a rare gift." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to be anyone else anymore, Liam." "Then don't," he said. "Let the mask fall. I'll still be here." The next morning, Sophie walked into her building, passed through the lobby like she always had, but this time her gaze flicked toward the maintenance desk. He wasn't there, and for the first time in weeks, she missed him in daylight. That same morning, Liam found a note tucked under his toolbox in the garage, hand-delivered by courier. It read, "I've decided not to run anymore. If you're ever ready to meet me under the sun, I'll be in the lobby. No mask, no name. Just me. S." He stared at the paper heart pounding not out of fear but anticipation. For the first time in years, someone wasn't walking away from the broken parts of him. They were walking toward them. The lobby of Bennett Media was a cathedral of glass and steel shiny surfaces, high ceilings, and cold air conditioning that hummed like distant wind. Sophie stood near the large, curved window facing the street, dressed not in her usual blazer, but in a soft cream sweater and jeans. Casual, unassuming, like someone trying for once to just be enough. The receptionists gave her curious glances. She never loitered. She never arrived without a meeting. She ignored them. She was waiting. The seconds ticked past noon, and for a moment doubt crept in like a cold draft. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe she'd ruined something that had only worked because it wasn't real. Then the front doors slid open. Liam stepped inside, toolbox in hand, wearing his standard navy workshirt sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. His boots tracked melted snow behind him, and his hair was still damp from the wind outside. Their eyes locked. Everything else vanished. No marble, no glass, no cold. Just the two of them, one woman shedding the weight of control, and one man carrying the quiet strength of survival. Liam slowed his pace but didn't stop. Sophie stepped forward. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He returned a small, cautious smile breaking across his face. "You came. You asked." They stood awkwardly for a moment, surrounded by a world that didn't quite know what to do with them now that they'd stepped into it together. Sophie took a breath. "I don't know what this is." Or what it's supposed to be. Me neither. But I don't want to go back to pretending, she said. Not after everything we shared in the dark. Liam nodded. We don't have to pretend, but we can take it slow. She smiled. Slow's good. Just then the elevator dinged behind them and broke the moment. Liam glanced toward the sound. I have a maintenance call on 16. Sophie gestured toward the cafe off the lobby. Then, maybe. After I'll be here. No mask. Still me. He tilted his head slightly. That's the version I like. And then he left simple as that, but something in her chest felt profoundly changed. She didn't feel alone. Not anymore. That night, 12:04 came and went. No call, but neither of them reached for their phone. Some things were no longer needed in the dark. The next day, a soft knock echoed on Sophie's office door. Her assistant popped in. Miss Bennett, there's a little girl here asking for you. She says she knows your name from bedtime stories. Sophie blinked. What? Before she could ask more, a small figure slipped past the doorframe. Hi, said Emma Carter, a burst of energy wrapped in a lavender parka and glittered sneakers. She clutched a paper envelope crinkled at the corners and beamed up at Sophie like they'd been pen pals for years. Sophie stepped out from behind her desk. Emma. My dad didn't know I was doing this, Emma said conspiratorially. I asked Mrs. Gale to walk me here after school. She knows you're nice. Well, thank you. That's very brave of you. Emma held out the envelope. I wrote something. For you. Sophie took it gently and opened it. Inside was a drawing in crayon stick figures, one taller with brown scribbles for hair, another with wavy lines and high heels, and a little girl in the middle holding both their hands. Above it was a big blue sky, and in uneven letters, I think we all need stars, even grown-ups. Sophie's breath caught. Emma looked up at her, eyes wide and sincere. You helped my dad smile again. I thought maybe he helped you too. Sophie knelt slowly. He did, Emma. He really did. Then maybe you shouldn't just talk at night, Emma said matter-of-factly. Maybe you should go look at stars for real. With him. Sophie laughed softly, blinking away the sting behind her eyes. You're wise for someone who still eats cereal with marshmallows. Emma grinned. Daddy says I get it from Mom, but I think I just watch people. Sophie reached out, brushing a curl behind the girl's ear. You're going to be something special, Emma. You already are. Emma shrugged. You are too. You just forgot. That evening, Liam opened the front door to find Gail holding Emma's hand, a knowing smile on her face. Before you say anything, yes, I walked her safely, and yes, I had permission from her teacher. Emma skipped into the house as if she hadn't just given a corporate CEO an emotional epiphany. Gail leaned in, eyes twinkling. She drew Sophie a picture. Said it needed to be done. Liam exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. Did she? She did. And I have to say, your kid's got taste. That woman looked like someone who could run the world, but just needed a reason to slow down. He laughed, shaking his head. She's something. So are you, Gail said. Don't let your past trick you into thinking you can't be part of something new. He didn't answer, but he looked toward the kitchen where Emma was humming and setting the table for two, and he thought, just maybe the old woman was right. Later that night, Liam received a text. It wasn't from an unknown number. Sophie, your daughter thinks we need to look at the stars. Want to take her advice? Liam stared at the screen, heart pounding softly in his chest. Not fear this time, but hope. He typed back, Liam, only if you promise to show up as you. No masks, just the woman I've been waiting to meet. They met under the stars 2 nights later. Not at a fancy rooftop or candlelit patio, but in Liam's modest backyard where a rickety lawn chair and a wool blanket became their corner of the universe. The air was cool, and a faint scent of pine drifted in from the woods nearby. Emma had gone to bed early after insisting that Sophie take the good chair and whispering to her dad that she'd already brushed her teeth twice. Sophie looked up at the constellations overhead. "I forgot how quiet it is out here." Liam chuckled. "That's because you spend your nights in a glass tower." She smiled but didn't look at him. "It's strange. The city makes you feel important." But silence. "It makes you feel honest." He glanced at her, then noticing how different she looked in the dim backyard light. Not polished, not powerful, just real. "That's why I sit out here sometimes," he said, "to remember what's underneath the noise." She nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. "I've built a life on noise." Liam turned his eyes to the sky. Then maybe it's time to listen to the quiet. For a few minutes they sat in companionable silence, broken only by the creak of a tree branch in the wind and the hum of faraway traffic. Then Sophie spoke, almost in a whisper. "Do you ever feel like you're pretending?" she asked. "Like you're performing what people expect of you instead of just being?" He didn't answer right away. Then, every day, at least until about 8 to 10 p.m. when Emma asks me to help brush her unicorn's hair, and I remember I'm just a dad trying to survive. Sophie laughed, and it was a sound Liam wished he could bottle. It wasn't refined or delicate, it was unguarded. "I think I envy that," she said. "That your life has something pure in it. Something that doesn't want anything from you but your presence." He glanced at her. "Maybe you're just around people who forgot how to want the right things." She looked down, picking at a loose thread on the blanket. "That includes me." "No," Sophie, Liam said gently. "You called at 12:04 because a part of you remembered who you are, past the CEO, past the image. That part of you is still there. You're just learning to listen to her again." She didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered under the stars. And for a while, that was enough. But even the most honest nights have a morning after. The next week, Sophie sat at the head of the long executive boardroom table. Her hair was pinned up her blouse immaculate, her words sharp. Around her were 8 men and women in expensive suits, but not one of them looked at her the way Liam had. And that terrified her. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't want to impress them. She wanted to be known. But the room didn't allow for that. Not in this world. Not in this company she'd built with sweat and perfection. She could feel herself slipping back into the persona, the voice, the armor. George, her longtime COO and trusted lieutenant, leaned forward mid-meeting. "There's buzz around your little visitor in the lobby last week. One of the junior PR guys saw you talking to a maintenance contractor. Is that something I should be concerned about?" Sophie's jaw tightened. "He's a friend." George arched a brow. "From what part of your world?" Her silence was its own kind of answer. George exhaled, voice lowering. "You have a reputation to protect. Personal stories get out, especially when they don't fit the narrative. And we both know the press will twist any crack in the armor." Sophie looked down at the table at the pen in her hand, at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized anymore. After the meeting, she walked past her office and kept going straight to the elevator, straight to the lobby, straight into the open air. That night, Liam waited for her. Not at 12:04. At 8:30, with hot chocolate and an extra blanket, watching the stars and listening for footsteps that never came. At 9:30, he checked his phone. No text, no voicemail. By 10:15, Emma wandered out in her pajamas. "She's not coming?" she asked sleepily. Liam shook his head. "Not tonight." Emma climbed into his lap, curling under his arm like a kitten. "Maybe she's scared." "Of what?" "Of liking us." Liam stared out into the night. "Maybe." Emma's breath slowed as she drifted off warm and small against him. He looked up at the sky, the same stars overhead. But tonight they felt farther away. Sophie didn't call that night, or the next. At the end of the week, Sophie found herself back in her office, staring at the framed magazine cover on her wall. Bennett Media's Woman of the Year. But all she could see was what wasn't in the frame. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't real. The version of her that sat under stars in a backyard sipping cocoa and laughing at unicorn hair was missing entirely, and she missed that version of herself more than anything. Later that night, alone in her car on a side street 2 blocks from Liam's house, she stared at her phone. She didn't dial. Instead, she whispered into the silence of her car, "I'm not okay, but I still want to try." The wind had picked up just after midnight, rustling the branches outside Liam's window. He lay in bed, one arm behind his head, the other resting across his chest phone inches from his hand. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed into you rather than offered rest. He hadn't heard from Sophie in 5 days. Not since that last night she'd promised to meet under the stars. He'd told himself he wouldn't call her, that she needed space, that maybe she'd slipped back into her old life, into the fortress of corner offices and curated perfection. But that didn't make the ache any less. He closed his eyes. And then, as if summoned by the beat between 2 heartbeats, the phone rang. Not a message, not a voicemail, a call. 12:04 a.m. Liam sat up breath-catching and answered without looking. "Hello?" There was a pause, a breath, and then her voice soft and frayed at the edges. "I didn't know if you'd answer." He swallowed hard. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I almost didn't," she whispered. "I parked outside your street 3 nights ago. I watched your porch light go out. I couldn't get out of the car." Liam's chest tightened. "You were here. I couldn't face you," she admitted. "Not after disappearing like that." "Why did you—" Sophie didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice cracked. "Because I'm scared of what it means when someone sees me without the mask and stays." Liam leaned forward, fingers pressing into the blanket. "You don't have to be perfect for me to stay, Sophie. That's easy for you to say. You're grounded, real. You've lost things and survived. I've just hidden." Liam exhaled slowly. "You think I didn't hide after Claire died?" She stilled. "Claire, my wife," he said quietly. "It's been 3 years. Car accident. Emma was only 3. I hid in silence and work and keeping just busy enough not to feel the emptiness. I know what it's like to be afraid of being seen." Sophie's breath hitched. "I didn't know. I never told you. Not because I was protecting myself, but because I didn't want you to feel like you had to carry my pain, too. I wish you had told me." He smiled sadly. "I just did?" Silence settled between them, not heavy but full. Then Sophie said, "I lost someone too. My dad. A year ago. He was the only person who made me feel like I didn't have to be impressive to be loved. When he died, Brent, my fiancé, left. Said I wasn't myself anymore, but the truth is, I didn't know who that was to begin with." "Was that the night you called me?" "Yes," she said. "I left a gala. Everyone was laughing and networking and being important. I felt like I was screaming into a soundproof room. So, you picked up the phone. I didn't mean to call you. I meant to call the grief hotline. But I misdialed." Liam's throat tightened. "And still, we talked." "We did more than talk," Sophie whispered. "You reminded me I was still human, that I hadn't completely disappeared." Liam's voice was soft. "You were never gone. You just forgot how to come home." Another pause. Then, through a shaky breath, Sophie said, "Liam, I don't know what this is, but I miss you. Not just your voice. You." He let her words settle raw and sincere. The woman who once spoke with polished power was now just a woman who wanted to be loved without conditions. "I miss you too," he said. "And I don't need to define this, but I do want to keep building it." "I'm not good at building," she said, almost apologetically. "You don't have to be." "I've got the tools," he replied with a gentle smile in his voice. Sophie laughed, the sound small but warm. That was terribly corny, and completely true. They were quiet for a long moment, each absorbing the presence of the other in the safest space they knew, not the daylight, not the roles they wore, but the fragile place between midnight and dawn. Then Sophie asked, "Can I come over?" Not tonight. But soon Liam's heart beat faster. Anytime he said, "The porch light stays on for a reason." The next morning, Liam found Emma at the breakfast table with her cereal and her coloring book. She looked up with sleepy eyes. "Did she call?" He paused, surprised. "How'd you know?" Emma shrugged. "Because you're smiling again." Liam ruffled her curls. "She might visit soon." Emma grinned. "Then I better draw her something better than a stick figure this time." Elsewhere in the city, Sophie stood in front of her bathroom mirror wiping away the last smudge of mascara from eyes that had wept not from sadness, but from release. She looked at herself, not as a CEO, not as a woman who'd been left, not as a voice in the dark, but as someone coming back into her own skin. She pulled out her phone and typed a message. "Thank you for waiting in the silence. I'm ready to be seen now." She hit send. Then she stepped into the sunlight. The invitation wasn't extravagant. No formal letter, no catered setting. Just a simple text from Sophie Company Gala this Saturday. "Come as you are. Bring Emma if she wants. I'd like you to see my world. Not to impress you. To share it." Liam stared at the message for a long time. He read it twice, then again. He wasn't a gala man. He didn't own a suit. He hadn't shaken hands with men in ties since his military discharge, and even then the handshakes felt more like contracts than connection. Still, the tone of her message was gentle, honest, not a test, an invitation. That night, over dinner, he asked Emma, "You remember Sophie's Company?" Emma looked up from her plate of spaghetti. "The building with the shiny floors." "That's the one. She sent us an invitation. They're having a big party Saturday night." Emma's eyes widened. A party with real napkins and music, something like that. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Will there be dancing?" Liam smiled. "Possibly." Emma grinned. "Then you can't say no." On Saturday, Liam stood in front of the bathroom mirror awkwardly adjusting the collar of a borrowed blazer. Gail had found it in her late husband's closet, swearing it still had charm left in the seams. The sleeves were a touch long, but the shoulders fit. He smoothed his hair, exhaled, and stepped into the living room. Emma gasped like she'd just seen Superman step off the page. "Daddy, you look like a movie star." He laughed, slightly red. "You think so?" She nodded, clutching her tiny clutch purse. "Sophie is gonna faint." "Let's hope not." The Bennett Media Gala was held at the Downtown Art Museum, a breathtaking venue with glass ceilings and soft lighting that made the paintings shimmer like reflections on water. As Liam entered, with Emma, he felt every pair of eyes flick toward him. Not with malice, but with curiosity. The man in worn dress shoes. The man holding the hand of a little girl in sparkly sneakers. He almost turned back, but then he saw her. Across the gallery floor, Sophie stood beneath a suspended sculpture of cascading lights wearing a simple dark blue dress that caught the room like moonlight in motion. She wasn't holding a wine glass. She wasn't networking. She was waiting. And the moment she saw them, her face changed not for show, but for real. She smiled and it reached her eyes. She walked toward them, her steps deliberate but unhurried as though she was walking toward the most important decision of her life and had already made it. "Hi," she said, kneeling in front of Emma. "You must be the one who gives the best advice." Emma nodded. "I told Daddy you were worth showing up for." Sophie laughed, glancing up at Liam. "She's not wrong." Then she stood. The room seemed to fade. Liam offered a hand. "You look—" "Real," she finished teasing, "but soft." "Yes, and beautiful." She took his hand. "You ready to meet my world? I'm more interested in meeting the version of you that lives behind it." That stopped her, just for a beat. Then she leaned in and kissed his cheek. "Come on," she whispered. "I want you to see what I've built, then tell me what I might have missed." Over the next hour, Liam met her colleagues, her board, her assistant, who eyed him with barely veiled surprise, and a man in glasses named Jonathan, who asked pointedly, "So, you're the guy?" "The guy?" Liam asked. Sophie answered, "The one who answered when I needed someone most." Jonathan blinked, then offered a respectful nod. Emma, meanwhile, stole the show, complimenting a woman's shoes, eating a mini cupcake in one bite, and asking a violinist how long it took to learn to make feelings come out of strings. But the real moment came when Sophie stood on stage to address the room. She spoke clearly, confidently, but not polished, not scripted. As most of you know, she began this year has been one of change for me personally and for the company. What you may not know is that the most valuable thing I've gained this year didn't come from strategy or sales. She paused. The room stilled. It came from a phone call. A wrong number, actually. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. I called in the middle of a panic attack thinking I was reaching a hotline, but the man who answered wasn't a professional. He was a father, a widower, a stranger who chose to stay on the line not because it was his job, but because it was his nature. She looked directly at Liam. Since then, I've come to believe that true success isn't what we build for the world, it's who we become when no one's watching, and who we choose to stay with when the lights are low. There was a hush then, quiet, genuine applause. Emma tugged Liam's hand. "She means you, Daddy." "I know," he said, voice thick. After the speech, as people mingled and music filled the hall again, Sophie returned to them. Liam met her eyes. "That was brave." "No," she said. "That was honest. I think I've spent my whole life chasing applause, but tonight I just wanted to be known." And now he asked. She reached out, fingers brushing his. "Now I want to see what it feels like. To build something that doesn't need to impress anyone." He looked down at her hand, then at Emma, spinning in circles under the twinkle lights. He squeezed Sophie's hand. "Then let's build it." On Monday morning, Sophie stepped into the executive elevator of Bennett Media with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't come from victory or strategy, but from waking up and knowing she no longer had to perform to be worth loving. She wore no jewelry, no designer heels, just a tailored navy suit and a quiet kind of confidence. The gala had gone better than she could have imagined. Her words, raw and unscripted, hadn't just landed, they'd settled into the hearts of the people who mattered most. And Liam. He had stayed by her side through it all, not as her statement, but as her anchor. But as the elevator doors opened to the 20th floor, Sophie felt the shift before she saw it. George was already waiting by her office door. The look on his face wasn't rage. It was worse control, wrapped in politeness. "Good morning," he said evenly. Sophie met his eyes. "George, do you have a moment?" He gestured toward the glass-walled conference room where 3 board members waited inside, their expressions unreadable. Sophie hesitated. "Sure." Inside, George closed the door and turned, hands clasped like a lawyer preparing to present his case. "I'll get right to it," he said. "There's been talk after the gala." About what Sophie asked, voice steady. "About you, about your speech, about the man you brought." Sophie didn't flinch. "Liam." George gave a tight smile. "Yes." "Liam, the working-class contractor you described as the man who saved you. That's what happened." One of the board members, a woman named Diana, leaned forward. "Sophie, it was a lovely speech, but it's raised questions, concerns." "Concerns," Sophie repeated. George nodded. "Shareholders are wondering if your personal entanglements are beginning to cloud your professional judgment. You're seen as the face of Bennett Media, and your face has always been polished, aspirational." Sophie inhaled deeply. "And now it's human. That's the problem, isn't it?" Diana exchanged a glance with another member. "You know how perception works in our industry. Your identity has value. That value must be protected. And if I choose to protect what's real instead of what's marketable?" Sophie asked calmly. George tilted his head. "We're not saying you can't have a personal life, but when it becomes the headline, when it challenges the narrative, then we have to talk about optics, about the brand." Sophie stood still, but inside her something cracked. Not from the criticism, but from the realization they didn't see her. They saw what she'd built for them. and now that she wanted to be herself, she was a threat. She thought of Liam, of Emma spinning beneath museum lights, of laughter on a back porch and silence that healed. She looked George in the eye. I won't apologize for being a person, for loving someone who reminds me who I am when the noise stops. Sophie, George began, but she raised a hand. If that's unacceptable to the board, then let's be clear about it. I won't pretend anymore. I won't hide the parts of me that make me whole. No one spoke, so she turned and walked out. That evening she didn't wait for 12:04. She called Liam at 7:46. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, and though she wanted to be strong, the tremor in her voice gave her away. "I had a meeting this morning," she began with the board. "What happened?" he asked gently. "They told me that being with you, being myself, puts the company at risk." Silence. Then Liam's voice, soft but sure. "Do you believe that?" "No," she said. "I believe that I finally said something real, and the people who benefited from my mask got scared." He didn't speak right away. When he did, it wasn't with reassurance. It was with truth. "You don't have to choose me," he said, "but you shouldn't have to choose against yourself." That stopped her cold. She blinked into the quiet of her car parked outside the grocery store. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "You're doing what no one ever taught us to do," he said. "You're choosing wholeness over performance." Tears blurred her vision. "Why are you so steady when I'm falling apart?" He laughed softly. "Because I've fallen apart before. I know what it sounds like when the pieces start to fall into place instead of away." 2 days later, Sophie stood at the head of the conference table again. Same board, same polished glass. But this time she brought a folder. Inside it, her resignation. Not a protest. Not a failure. A reclaiming. "I'm proud of what I built," she told them. "But if the cost of leadership is losing myself, then it's too high. This company deserves a face that's unshakable. I deserve a life that's unfiltered." Diana opened her mouth to protest. George didn't speak. Sophie smiled. "Thank you. For the years. And for the clarity." That night she walked up the path to Liam's front door with Emma's drawing in her purse and peace in her step. Liam answered before she could knock. She smiled. "I quit today." He raised a brow. "You okay? I've never been more okay," she said. Then added, "Do you still have that porch light on?" He stepped aside, voice warm. "It's always been for you." The next morning, the sun spilled golden light over the kitchen counter where Sophie stood, sleeves rolled, flipping pancakes. She didn't need to. Liam was more than capable of making breakfast, but she insisted. Something about finally choosing this life made her want to live inside it. Emma sat at the table humming to herself as she drew another galaxy of crayon stars. Liam leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching the scene with a quiet wonder he didn't dare speak aloud. "You always this domestic," he teased. Sophie glanced over her shoulder. "Only when I'm nervous." "What for?" She smiled faintly. "Because this feels real. And real is terrifying." He walked over gently, took the spatula from her hand and replaced it with a cup of coffee. "Then, let's be terrified together." They spent the day like a slow-breath library, books and errands, a trip to the farmer's market where Emma charmed every vendor, and an afternoon walk down by the river where Sophie kicked off her heels and waded barefoot with Emma, laughter echoing under the trees. As the sun began to dip, they returned home and sat on the porch wrapped in old blankets, sipping tea as evening came. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," Sophie admitted softly. Liam nodded. "That's the problem with survival mode. Even when you're safe, your body doesn't believe it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So, what do we do?" "We keep showing up, until the fear runs out of breath." She smiled against his shirt. "That's poetic. That's exhaustion." He chuckled. "Poetry's a side effect." Later that evening, Emma was fast asleep with a flashlight still glowing under her blanket fort, and Liam stood in the backyard staring up at the stars alone. Sophie stepped out quietly, wrapping her arms around herself as the cool air brushed her skin. "Thought you disappeared on me," she said. "I was giving the stars a chance to show off before you came out and stole the spotlight." She rolled her eyes but smiled. "You always this charming. Only when I'm in love," he said so gently it didn't feel like a grand gesture. Just truth spoken plainly. Sophie stilled, not because she was unsure, but because for the first time those words didn't bring fear. They brought peace. She stepped closer. "Say it again." He turned to face her eyes, calm. "I'm in love with you." She took a breath. "Then I guess I should say it too." "You don't have to. I want to." She touched his face. "I'm in love with you, Liam Carter. Not the voice in the dark. Not the man I imagined. You. The man who listens when no one else knows what to say. The father who gives his daughter stars when she asks for cereal. The man who doesn't fix me, but lets me fix myself." A long silence passed between them. But it wasn't empty. It was full of history, of healing, of hope. Then Liam looked up. "Dance with me." Sophie blinked. "There's no music." He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped a playlist. A soft acoustic melody began to float into the night, gentle guitar, a voice like old velvet. "Now there is," he whispered. He held out his hand, and Sophie stepped into his arms. They swayed beneath the stars, surrounded by crickets and the faint hum of porch lights. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Inside the house, Emma peeked out from her blanket fort, watching from the window with a sleepy smile. She whispered to herself, "They found it." Then she turned off her flashlight and curled deeper into her blankets, secure in a world that finally made sense. A few days later, Sophie stood at a podium, not at a press conference, but at a quiet event hosted by a local nonprofit dedicated to mental health awareness. She was no longer CEO. She wasn't there in stilettos or designer labels. She was there in flats, jeans, and her truth. Behind her, on a banner, were the words, "The 1204 Foundation," because someone always needs you most in the dark. Sophie looked out at the modest crowd and smiled. "Many of you know I left the corporate world recently. Not because I failed, but because I realized success without soul is just performance. This foundation was born from a wrong number at the right time, from a conversation that saved me when I didn't think I deserved to be saved, and from a man who stayed on the line when he didn't have to." She turned, and Liam stood at the edge of the crowd, Emma holding his hand. Both were beaming. "This foundation," Sophie continued, "is for anyone who has ever felt invisible at midnight, and for the strangers who choose to see them anyway." That night, back on the porch as the clock inched toward 12:04 a.m., Liam glanced at his phone. It didn't ring. Instead, Sophie placed her hand over his. "You don't have to wait for the call anymore," she said. "Why?" "Because I'm already here." The seasons shifted quietly. Winter surrendered to spring, and with it came softer mornings, children's laughter in the park again, and evening skies blushing pink instead of gray. Life, Liam found, didn't announce healing like a thunderclap. It returned in whispers, small routines, familiar laughter, a home that finally felt full again. The house once shadowed by memory now bloomed with life. Sophie had moved in gradually, not with fanfare, but with toothbrushes, shared calendars, and the unmistakable scent of her coffee blend. Her shoes by the door, her laugh in the kitchen, her presence not loud but known. Emma had taken it all in stride, as children do when love walks in gently. She began calling Sophie my person at school, then bonus mom, in whispered goodnights. She asked questions like, "Do you think the stars miss us when it's cloudy, and will we still be together when I'm a grandma?" To both, Sophie had answered without hesitation. Yes, always. One weekend afternoon, Sophie sat at the dining table with Emma, a cup of tea steaming beside her while Liam fixed a loose door hinge nearby. "What are you working on, Em?" Sophie asked. Emma held up a folded paper booklet with a crayon-drawn cover, Our Family Story. by Emma Carter. Inside were stick figures, bright colors, and short sentences scrawled in big, careful letters. Sophie flipped to the second page. It read, "My dad was sad." Then he talked to a lady in the phone. She was sad, too. Then they talked, and they were not sad. Then they hugged. Then we had pancakes. She smiled, blinking away sudden tears. "This is beautiful." Emma grinned. "It's for school. My teacher said stories help people remember." Sophie turned to the last page. "Now we are happy. I have a real home. And at night, nobody cries alone." Sophie reached out and pulled Emma into her lap. "You are going to change the world someday, sweetheart." "I already did," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I helped you both stop being scared." Liam, overhearing from across the room, placed his screwdriver down and walked over. He kissed Emma's forehead and met Sophie's eyes over her shoulder. "She's not wrong," he said. That evening they sat together on the back porch, a ritual now deeply rooted in their lives. The stars were bright, and the air smelled faintly of new grass and lilac. "I never told you something," Sophie said quietly. Liam turned to her. "That first night, the reason I misdialed. The last number of the grief hotline was a 4. I pressed a 3. Close miss, he said. Or perfect miss, she corrected, because the person who was supposed to answer did. He took her hand. Some calls aren't wrong. They're meant to find the one who's been listening all along." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You still keep the porch light on." "Always," he said. "But now it's not for someone who's lost." She looked up. "Then who is it?" For he kissed her temple. "For everyone who finds their way home." A few weeks later, the 1204 Foundation held its first full community event, a Starlight storytelling night for families coping with grief, mental health challenges, and quiet loneliness. The auditorium was modest, filled with folding chairs, soft lamps, and warm voices. Liam stood at the back helping organize refreshments while Sophie welcomed guests. Emma was the first one to step onto the little stage. She wore her favorite yellow dress and clutched her story booklet. "My name's Emma," she said into the microphone, "and I want to tell you something real." The room quieted. "A long time ago, my daddy was sad, and a lady was sad, and they didn't know each other. But one night they found each other just by listening. They didn't even know names yet. Just feelings. And then they got brave." She smiled wide. "Now we have a home. Not a house. A real home. And I want other people to know it's okay to be the one who calls. And it's okay to be the one who answers." There was not a dry eye in the room. After the event, as they packed up chairs and folded tablecloths, a man approached Liam, middle-aged with tired eyes and a voice as soft as gravel. "I lost my son last year," the man said. "Tonight was the first time I've heard someone say something that didn't feel like pity. Just truth." Liam nodded. Sometimes truth needs a quiet place to land. The man shook his hand. "Thanks for building one." That night at 12:04 a.m., Liam's phone didn't ring. It hadn't in months. And yet he found himself glancing at it. Not in fear, not in sadness, but in gratitude. Because 12:04 had once been the loneliest moment of his life,